Hi everyone, my name is Anchovies, and in today's video we're going to be talking about Arlecchino because they just released, well, not all of her abilities, but they gave us a general sense of how Arlecchino is going to work in-game, so I did want to talk about this really quickly. So firstly, let's just start with the type of character that Arlecchino is going to be. So based on the gameplay that they gave us, she's definitely going to be an on-field DPS unit, more specifically a normal attack-based DPS unit. So this is a bit different from characters like Hu Tao, who are charge attack based. She will rely on her normal attacks to do damage, which is something to keep in mind when we're talking about a normal attack based character is things like preference for things like shielders or interruption resistance, as well as taking into consideration things like internal cooldowns, because assuming that she's using her normal attacks and they are standard, that does mean that she's not going to consistently vape all of her hits. She's only going to vape a portion of her hits throughout her entire duration of rotations. Now this does not mean that things like vape teams are bad per se. In fact, they're still going to be quite potent in my opinion. However, it's just that it won't be as potent as it potentially could be because of that limitation. But now let's talk a bit more about her ability specifically, starting with her normal attacks. So the way that her normal attacks work is it seems like it's a 6 combo hit string, and the reason why her entire gameplay is centered around her normal attacks is the way her Bond of Life mechanic works. So in order to obtain this Bond of Life, what Arlecchino needs to do is she triggers her elemental skill. It'll mark enemies, as you saw in the preview. It has like a little X on enemies, and when enemies have that mark on them, that means that when you use your charge attack, you will then consume the mark and you will gain a Bond of Life. Now, this does not work exactly like how Bond of Life works in Genshin Impact, because the way that Bond of Life works specifically in Genshin Impact is you have the Bond of Life and then you can heal to remove it. But with Arlecchino, she wants to gain Bond of Life and sustain it as much as possible, because what this Bond of Life does when it's above or at a certain percentage of her max HP's worth is that it allows her to have infused pyro attacks. And over time, she will consume a certain percentage of her Bond of Life, as well as on each normal attack, it will reduce the cooldown of her elemental skill. So the whole point is that you use her skill, then you consume the marks on enemies to then obtain a certain Bond of Life, and then with that Bond of Life, over time you will continue to do normal attacks until you either run out or you decide to just end the rotation at whatever period of time you choose. Now with her elemental skill, you don't have to actually consume it right away. It is safe to just use her skill, then swap out to something like your support units, because the thing about her elemental skill is that once you leave it, I think after about 5 or 6 seconds, it'll then upgrade to a next level directive. And what that means is that when you consume that one, it's more enhanced, meaning that basically you'll gain more Bond of Life. And this is especially helpful in single target, which allows Arlecchino to perform well both in single target and some minimal AoE situations like 3 enemies or even like 4 enemies. Although in those situations you probably still want to group her, but regardless, the way her Blood Debt do works and her directives in general allow her to have some level of consistency with her performance. And then her elemental skill will periodically do pyro damage. It's similar to Hu Tao's like Blossom thing that does pyro damage like once every like 5-ish seconds or so. Nothing significant on that part. And then we get to her elemental burst. So her elemental burst will do an instance of like AoE pyro damage, and then if there's marks on enemies, it'll consume the marks first, then it will heal Arlecchino based on the percentage of the Bond of Life and her attack. So what this means is that once you use her burst, if you have any Bond of Life, it's going to basically wipe that Bond of Life and then convert it into healing for Arlecchino. Meaning that you can't really do like super extended combos that try to make use of perma-stacking her Blood Debt do stacks. However, this does also mean that you don't have to use her burst every rotation, because the primary use of her burst is both for the healing but also for the fact that it resets her elemental skills cooldown. So of course this does allow you to typically get 2 elemental skill casts per rotation, which is really nice, and on top of that, you actually may not have to even use burst every rotation because of the fact that Arlecchino is probably going to strongly prefer characters that shield her or give her some interruption resistance, meaning that more often than not you won't really need to use it unless you really need to use it, which probably won't happen every single rotation unless you're taking tons of damage from certain enemies or you're deciding to play her in a team with little to no form of defensive utility whatsoever. And the reason why she's able to heal with her elemental burst is actually because of one of the passives that they introduced for her, which is the fact that she cannot be healed by other characters in the team. So her only form of healing that she can get is through her elemental burst, which is why I mentioned that she's definitely going to want characters that either give her some shielding or interruption resistance or something along those lines, because relatively speaking, she's going to be quite fragile just from looking at this alone. Now, in turn for not being able to get healed by other characters, when in combat, she gains a 40% pyro damage bonus, which is really nice. But yeah, overall, just from this preview from the 4.6 livestream, Arlecchino definitely looks like an interesting character. I have already done some pre-TC work, however, I'm not going to introduce that because I'm not into doing full-blown pre-release stuff as of late, mainly just because I don't feel like dealing with Hoyoverse right now. I just don't feel like dealing with them. But overall, she looks cool, the aesthetics are cool. I'm definitely pulling for her because I've been waiting for her for a hot minute, and I have saved up a decent amount of pulls, so I'm definitely going to go for her. And once I get her, I am going to make a much more in-depth video. Definitely going to talk about things like combos and rotations, because that will definitely be something that might be relevant to Arlecchino. But yeah, that's all I've got to say for this quick little breakdown from this 4.6 trailer introduction of Arlecchino. Let me know if you're going to pull for Arlecchino down in the comments below, or if you're saving for another character, potentially Sethos or Clorinde. And until the next video, bye bye.